Hello, everybody. I'm David Holbrook, founder and ringleader of Original Thinkers. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been having conversations with some of our guests, past and present and future, talk about what's going on in the world, and they've been really interesting to do. And I'm excited to be joined today by Brandon Victor Dixon, who joined us this past year and really was just such a star. And it's great to see you, Brandon. How you been?
I've been well. It's good to see you too.
You're hunkered down in New York City?
I am hunkered down in New York City. Yeah, that is the way to put it. You know, since I think people we are on stay-at-home orders and most businesses are closed. Though some of them are starting to open up. Phase one is beginning here.
Well, your main business, we have so much to talk about, but let's just start with what you do, Broadway. Wow, do you have any sense of it? And what's the mood amongst your fellow artists about what's going on on the COVID front?
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody was nobody in any industry expected a significant enough event short of war. And even war is an abstract concept to us at this point in this country because we've been in war for about 20 years and doesn't affect our daily lives here anymore.
No.
But, you know, other than war, nobody expects an industry-wide shutdown, something of that magnitude. And so that was unexpected, and nobody expects something like that to last long. Just doesn't seem realistic. And so, you know, for a while, there were a number of people thinking, all right, maybe June, July, let's see how this. But I think very early on, I could see that this wasn't nothing was going to happen with Broadway and live performance until next year. You know, the official word from the Broadway community is that they will be back in September, or they'll re-examine in September. But that's not realistic at all. There will be no live theater in New York City to any significant extent until the spring at the earliest.
Wow, and that devastates so much. I mean, of course, the actors, the writers, the people in the band pit, the orchestra pit, everybody. What's the mood amongst you?
Upwards of $14 billion a year for New York City. So it's like, you know, the Broadway theater generates more money for New York City than all of its sports teams combined.
No way.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a huge loss of revenue for the city. And then, yes, there are the actors and the singers who are out of work. There are the writers who are out of work. But then there are also legions of wardrobe individuals who work, people who work on the crew. But one of the reasons, I mean, it's so indicative of so much, because one of the reasons why Broadway won't come back is because the economic decimation to the secondary and tertiary industries that really support it are also being gutted. So food and beverage, restaurant life here, I can't imagine more than 50% of the restaurants in New York City coming back, right? And when they come back, they'll come back at limited capacity. They're not going to hire back as many people as they hired before. They're going to hire people back at lower wages. And so you have a whole other industry that really supports live theater in New York that is going to take a second to regenerate as well.
And for you as a creative, how do you express yourself? I mean, you're used to thinking things through, working through a character, figuring out the next role. Do you feel this loss of a lifeblood in a way?
I don't, but that's largely because I have had the benefit of having had a number of theater experiences already, right? So I'm used to the ebb and flow of it now, of working and not working and working and not. Because a lot of people, when we started to have these conversations about how's your life, how are you dealing with the transition, you know, I had to say to most people, when I'm not working, this is largely what my life is like, you know? So it hasn't been a huge transition for me. And also because I have been expanding into other arenas in the last couple of years. I have a production company, you know, we're doing a show for Disney Plus, and I have a couple other things that enable me to understand that even though things might get a little challenging, I know there's stuff ahead, and I don't have it in me, considering my circumstances, to really complain or have too much anxiety, considering the nature of what I know a lot of people are going through in this country right now.
Yeah, I mean, it really is this seismic time. I mean, President Obama said we're living through a sea change, of course, talking about the George Floyd protests, the once in a century pandemic, we're in an election year, all this stuff happening all at once is quite momentous.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary confluence of events.
No, it really is. And to be living through them, and we've talked a little bit about living down in Telluride. I feel disconnected in a way, in one way that's good, in some ways that aren't. Let's talk a little bit about the George Floyd protests. And I mentioned Obama talking about this with a sea change, and saw you kind of shaking your head. And tell me what's your take on what's been happening in the streets of New York and cities and towns across America.
I think the response, just the community response to coming together to demand a change, to stand up for a thing, is really extraordinary. And seeing it around the globe is pretty extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
I think that what has enabled it is a very, very unique confluence of events. There's been growing social and economic unrest over the past 3 years in the country. There has been, and then you have an event like COVID, which shuts everything down and shuts everybody at home in a highly anxious, again, troubling situation, economic stress, feeling challenged, feeling like you don't have a lifeline, and then suddenly and then you get Ahmaud Arbery, and you get Breonna Taylor, and you get Amy Cooper, and
Amy Cooper. Can't forget about Amy Cooper.
And then you get George Floyd. So you 1, 2, 3, 4, and the George Floyd one was the most flagrant, and the lack of response to each of the things suddenly puts you at a moment where you explode. And part of the reason this is able to sustain, again, is because people had nothing to do. They weren't making any money. They weren't able to watch any sports. They weren't so your focus could be taken, and all that pent up energy could be driven somewhere. But inevitably, a wave like this starts to dissipate, and we'll have to see what happens. Also, there's the emotional cathartic expression of the need for things to be different. And then there's the tangible work of putting in place economic and political blocks and strategies that enable you to actually create a substantive, lasting transformation.
I've been thinking about that a lot, and that idea of how, how does that change actually happen, and how does the change stick? But there is a new level of certainly the changes in police tactics are significant. Whether the changes in police behavior, we'll see.
Reforms to police don't mean anything. Asking police to change how they train or change what they don't mean anything. Police are very well trained. It's just that they choose to exercise that training differently depending on who they're dealing with. What you need, I don't need all police to become great people. I do need our judicial system to hold them accountable when they break the law. I need our judicial system to hold people accountable when they break the law. And that's the real issue. It's that when crimes or when infractions happen to Black people and those associated with them, there's rarely a response. There's rarely an official governmental response, and the apathy of the there's the apathy of the public that allows for that to be the case. And those are the issues.
Well, I think there's also often a response, but it's untruthful. It's when you look at Arbery, you look at George Floyd. I mean, before that video came out, there was a whole different thing, and I think that's the thing that's the lie, the cover-ups that show these tactics to be so outrageous. Whether it's the chokeholds, the kneeling on the neck. I mean, and I think that the video cameras, all of this stuff, I think will lead to a change, but it's being led to me the wrong way in a way. It's because people are being forced rather than saying we're going to lead to changes that make more sense, and the lack of harassment of African Americans.
My friend, is never given. So if you want it, you have to force it.
And that's what I think. There's a tactical, practical change, but there is also something of just fundamental civil rights. And I thought, it's a fascinating conversation going on with the military wanting to change their bases named after Confederate leaders. I mean, as someone who's acted in history, played in history, to talk a little bit about that, and what do you think of that effort?
The issues when we first started talking about tearing down Confederate monuments, I felt a little differently, partly due to my ignorance. And I was like, I don't want us to tear these things down. I want us to educate people on the history about when they went up, why they went up, what's wrong with them, like rather than erasure. Right. But the other thing is recognizing that these monuments are pretty recent and went up, in recent political history to send messages. Then it's like, oh, okay, never mind, tear them all down. Right. And again, begin to start to think about how we talk, how we educate our youth about our history and about our values. And again, part of this begins to tie into the fact that America, it's too large a country. It's too big. The vastness that separates us creates different cultures and creates echo chambers. And so people are really living different lives in different places. And I think that's part of our challenge as a society. It's part of the challenge with police reform. It's such a local issue, and so it's hard to create like a federal program, but these are the debates.
Well, I want to go back to the idea of this country being too large. Of course, you played Aaron Burr in Hamilton. Do you think the founding fathers would have understood this, or did they have seen this coming? Do you think they tried to head this off?
Because again, what it came about was about territory, right? It's like so they're not thinking conceptually about that. They're thinking about territory. They're thinking about establishing a state. They're thinking about the commerce of the state. They're thinking about holding on to what they have and expanding it. It's like because when the country was founded, there were portions of North America that were owned by the French or owned by the Spanish or owned by you're still you're in a new territory, you're in an evolving land that you're fighting for. So no, I don't think they would. But this element again, like Confederate bases, Confederate monuments, we have to get away from the idea that because a specific faction in of our citizenry waged war against the Union, that we're going to venerate and espouse the individuals who tried to break our Union, particularly in trying to break our Union in order to preserve a caste state that limited the rights of so many of Americans. I mean, we can't get to the point. I'm sure we're not going to get to the point where we're willing to objectively evaluate Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and these people who owned slaves and raped children and that we venerate on our money and we celebrate every year. We're probably not going to get there. But we should be able to get to the point where the individuals who fought against the ideals that those people represented in the Union they created, that we can educate people to be like, this is not a thing that we're going to celebrate. We're going to treat the Confederacy the way we treated Nazi Germany, which is where you can't fly the flag over there. And those children went through generations of education about what was right, what was wrong, what you did. And here we made a compromise because we weren't morally objecting to what was happening in the South. We were objecting to the economic disparities it was creating. The Southern economy was destroying the Northern economy because they had all this free labor. That's what started the Civil War. Or rather, that's what got the North to decide to start war with the South.
Right, that it was an economic thing, not a civil rights thing.
Yeah, because Abraham Lincoln, I mean, if you really break down his quotes, he was extremely racist and prejudiced. The things he said about black people was like, yeah. Now he might have grown and learned through his relationship with Frederick Douglass, and there might have been some things, but to paint a romanticized version of what was going on there, it kind of flies in the face of all the things we've been dealing with in the past 10, 20 years. Because if that was really the case back then, from a mentality standpoint, from a moral standpoint, then we wouldn't be where we are right now.
It's such a complicated origin story. I mean, if we look back, we look at Hamilton and we look at Jefferson and we look at these very flawed men who had a big vision, who are venerated, and yet did a lot of really shitty things.
They did great things for the people they represent.
Which were white people.
Well, I mean, it's one of the reasons, that's one of the things I look at, because people talk, you can say all these things about Donald Trump, but I say to people like, if he were representing my interests, I would love this guy. I would love this guy. Because he goes so hard. He goes so hard. He doesn't care.
He doesn't forgive. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't.
So if he repped for me, I would love him. I get why the people who love him. I was like, yeah. Now he's ignorant and he's crass and he's ignorant enough that he's starting to do damage to the country. And he's arrogant And so he operates according to arrogance instead of information. You can't start an overt trade war with China. You just don't have the power. It's not 30 years ago.
Right.
So it's just things like that. So you've decimated the Midwestern farming industry. Yeah, and you've been giving these guys money, but their industry is gone. So, it's a, but again, if he rep for me, whew.
I rewatched the speech he made at the end of Hamilton. We've talked about before at the end when Mike Pence was there, but Vice President-elect Pence. Mm-hmm. And, as we've talked about, I weirdly enough, unfortunately enough, saw that show that night and remembered we didn't know each other back then, but remember, it was fascinating to watch Hamilton, this vision of multiculturalism and this vision of America play out in front of somebody who I just thought didn't have that vision at all. And you said something, I remember that night, you said,
"Inalienable rights, sir. But we truly hope that this show has inspired you to uphold our American values and to work on behalf of all of us. Yeah. All of us.
All people, and sure doesn't seem to be that case. It seems, like you said, he's representing for somebody that's not you. He's representing for somebody that's not me. He's representing for his people, and it's not a protect all people kind of thing.
They're not even his people. He's representing for the people who think that he's their people.
Right. No, he doesn't like those people who like him for the most part, except for his fellow rich dudes. But other than that,
he's an opportunist. He's an opportunist.
When you made that speech, what I thought was, one, it was an incredible night of theater, obviously, with everything going on. But I thought you were gracious and, what's the right word, thoughtful and hopeful in ways that I just thought to myself, what I know of Mike Pence, there's no way he's going to, protect all people. There's no way he's going to take these words that you said so beautifully and assimilate them into his worldview. That night, and I know some of the background that you all got together to decide the statement. I remember, watching you pull something out to read. Did you think that there was a chance that he would protect all people, that Pence and or did you think that it was going to go the way it's gone?
I mean, because I believe anything's possible, sure. But no, I mean, I think that, Donald Trump has shown us who he is his whole life. He showed us who he was during that election, and so did Pence. So had Pence and the Republicans. Again, they're not with him, but they're willing to ride a winning train. They smart like that.
Right. But in terms of human rights for all people, for, working towards this, that's never what this was going to be about.
Look, if they were smart, had an opportunity, stumbled into the presidency, had an incredible opportunity to still kind of honor his base, but become like a champion of the people. Because if he had just ushered in labor reform bills, like infrastructure bills, and just started like building the really bipartisan things that had been bipartisan like 8 years ago before Obama said them, like everybody would have been like, oh my God. And we love him, and people would have worked together, like it would have been a thing. But no, Trump gonna be Trump. Trump gonna be Trump till he die.
Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing with We Are. You've got the shirt you're representing. You talked a lot about Original Thinkers. For people who weren't there, can you explain a little bit what it's about, and then also what's going on now?
Yeah, so We Are is really about creating a community, a network of individuals who will use the connective power of the arts to bridge the gaps between us as communities. And we do that by amplifying voices that emphasize our shared humanity. And this year for us, that's been about, with all the challenges that we're facing, it's been about trying to really tie people to the understanding that the issues that you're facing are really dynamically tied to the power of your vote and where you express that and how you express it, not just nationally, but locally particularly. So we've been working on initiatives that can kind of condense this information down into digestible ways to help people understand the power of their collective vote and voice, right? And we're moving into Michigan for the latter half of the year, working with things like the Flint Water Festival where we'll be one talking about the issues that are having to deal with water and infrastructure in Flint while registering voters and raising money to help with that infrastructure. We're going to be holding a water bill raffle. So, the more people who register to vote over a certain period of time, we're gonna pay some of the water bills for those people, like at a random, lottery. We're also working with organizations like food banks, et cetera, who are participating in COVID-related services. Since we can't be as hands-on tactile as we wanted to do before, we have to be a little bit remote. At least these organizations are getting into neighborhoods, into people's homes. And so we're partnering with them to get information about voting, about registration, and about mail-in voting, which is a big deal in Michigan, to them. So, we're working on different mechanisms of making sure we can get to the people who aren't readily available usually to receive this information.
You feel momentum with COVID has adjusted, but you still feel like you're working towards what you want to work towards with this?
Yeah, COVID has created challenging landscape circumstances and economic circumstances, but the recent social galvanization has kind of altered the playing field again. So there are people who want to be involved in social issues and in issues that will change our social landscape. So people are kind of now back on the, how do we get involved in the election? Where maybe there's money I can put to something here and there and everywhere. Because obviously COVID was both a social depressor and an economic depressor. So we found ourselves like, find cheaper ways to do the things we were trying to do before. And we're still on that mindset. But again, it's just about navigating the new landscape. But there's energy there to be capitalized on.
And is some of the energy out of the George Floyd protests and rallies, is that part of that energy?
George Floyd protest. It's primarily, that's become the capstone for injustice, right? Because the COVID stuff is about further disenfranchisement. We are more vulnerable to COVID because of decades of economic destabilization, not investing in communities, pulling out educational opportunities. Right. Not investing in home ownership in communities. So the schools suffer. So then suddenly a disease hits and you have a population that's health median is low. So they have more underlying comorbidities. The living environments are not as clean and safe. So any minor infection, let alone something that could blow up into a pandemic, it'll start to decimate these highly concentrated areas. But that's not because of the power of the virus. That's because of the weakness of the support systems of these areas, right? The pandemic is poor government and lack of regard for citizenry. It seems so far that coronavirus is only operating at a mortality rate of like around 1%, and it's still focused on people of 55 years or older with high levels of comorbidity. So except you find that disproportionately happening to certain populations who have these infrastructural problems that I told you, and that's what the pandemic is. It's lack of regard for all of your citizens and focusing on a select few.
What do you think happens? Let me ask you a different question. What role do you think art and music and culture plays in all of this moving forward?
A big part. This is, as they say, this is when artists go to work. There's a quote somebody gave me the other day I thought was right. It's this is precisely the time when artists go to work. Not when everything is fine, but in times of dread. That's our job. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore this pain, it is also crucial to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art.
Is that something that's motivating you every day? You live that already, but when you read that, is that something that you need, or it helps you to motivate? Or are you already plenty motivated?
Well, the poetry is always inspiring. But yeah, I'm pretty motivated. Not much of what is happening right now has changed me, because I'm aware of the issues, the battles that exist in our social forums, in our social fabric. And all of my work in each space is driven towards combating those issues and creating healing platforms of empowerment for those who require it. So, it has it's affirmed the necessity to continue to operate this way and to look for more opportunities to work this way. But the quote is a very, very helpful and supportive one and galvanizing one, particularly to share amongst people.
Are you sharing that with your fellow artists, your fellow creatives, and do you feel your community of actors, of performers, of Broadway folks, are feeling that urgency?
I think so. I absolutely think so. Everybody is driven right now to figure out what's next, and nobody's sitting back.
Think back, like when you were on our stage, you sang a couple songs from Hamilton, but of course Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On." And this has been, I don't know when that song was recorded, but it was a while back, and yet it still feels fully relevant.
The 70s, I can't remember that.
Yeah, it feels so spot on for this time.
Absolutely, but that's everything, I'm working on a play right now that it was a political satire that was written in 1930 that talks about racial and patriarchal social systems in the United States and the political and economic and group dynamics that intersperse with them, and everything that the author is saying is just spot on. To the point, down to how our government office officials operate, and how they choose sides or how they'll pay lip service to one, but they're already being paid by the other. So that, it's like, it's really, so, I think a thing for people to embrace, I think, and understand is that this is not new. These are not new issues. This is the next phase of this cyclical thing. And, you gotta, in order to make sure this movement is real, we have to pay attention to our history and not get caught in the okie doke. Just talk to the South African people. Apartheid seemed a global watershed moment. And at that point, 95% of the population, 2% of the population owned 95% of the land. And today, 30 years later, 84% of the population, 3% of the population still own 84% of the land. So it's like, so what was gained? And the next generation of South Africans are now far more militant because they're like, there were no economic changes. Our unemployment is still at 35%. We're still, what has happened?
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, truth and reconciliation only take you but so far. You can only ask and kumbaya but so much. You have to do that, but you also have to establish economic and political stability for the groups you want to represent.
Which is a multi-generational project.
Absolutely. So all of this energy right now is not about doing a thing now. It's about applying yourself to the thing that needs to be done.
There's that meme or whatever. They're like, can you believe I'm still dealing with this shit? And it kind of is astonishing, of course. And, African-American president, all this progress I put in air quotes, but here we are. Mm-hmm. So for you, it's put everything you got into this? Is that, you are already, it's not like you said, oh, I just woke up when I saw this video. You've been doing this. So just, as we close this out, tell me a little bit what's consuming your days and what you're just so psyched to move forward on.
Right now, for me, it's about focusing on galvanizing the Black vote in Michigan, Detroit, and Flint. Very focused on that. And as I said, in every industry, we're having these conversations about what things do actually need to change. What are people apathetic about? And within the theater industry, I'm forming some conversations with groups of people about, organizations that we can put together that can approach these things strategically in our micro and macro space. So, again, it's this idea of people recognizing that the old way doesn't work anymore, and you have to start to operate as a unified base to really affect changes in the world around you. And so I'm excited about those conversations and that shift in consciousness.
Seems like we need some original thinking here.
Seems like we do.
Brandon Victor Dixon, what a pleasure. Nice to share a smoothie with you.
Pleasure,
I'll
brother.
finish my, ready to go. Hey, real pleasure. It looks healthier than mine, but hey, I'm glad to know you. I'm super psyched on the work you're doing. Please let us know here at Original Thinkers what we can do to help. We can get out to our people, but it was really great having you out. And Telluride, we'll get you back. But in the meantime, hey man, I'm really impressed with everything you're doing. And
Appreciate it, brother. It's good to see you. We'll talk soon, okay?
Good to see you. Take good care of yourself, man.
All right, take care, everybody.
Hey, pleasure. Thank you.